When you have such a stranglehold agenda that conflicts with the scientific consensus, it's inevitable that you're going to resort to all-out deception and fact-twisting, just like creationists and your average run-of-the-mill conspiracy theorists. Being racist means that differences in behavior and capacity within a group of people is based largely, if not entirely, on their ethnic background. Seriously, sweetheart? It would behoove you to actually read the words underneath the pretty pictures next time. She said that scientists have stopped using the word race in the context you were using it, in reference to human biology and genetics. Is that all you could find of the various views of anthropologists on the subject of race? That's okay. I really couldn't find any either. What I did find was a steady consensus among anthropologists that the concept of race, as most lay people understand it, as having little to no basis in the realm of human taxonomy.
Populations are often interchangeable. Scientists exchanging the word race for population does not necessarily mean that they disagree with the concept of race.
The reason that anthropologists have replaced the word race in reference to human classification with terms like ethnicity and population is because it has become evident that the term was incorrect in the first place. That's how science works. When new information is presented, conclusions change. Of the American Anthropological Association, their definition of race is this: race, a recent idea created by Western Europeans following exploration across the world to account for differences among people and justify colonization, conquest, enslavement, and social hierarchy among humans. The term is used to refer to groupings of people according to common origin or background and associated with perceived biological markers. Among humans, there are no races except the human race. In biology, the term has limited use, usually associated with organisms or populations that are able to interbreed. Ideas about race are culturally and socially transmitted and form the basis of racism, racial classification, and often complex racial identities. In keeping with that, the source you did link for this incredibly dishonest representation of an obsolete survey, Klein's provided a concrete alternative to thinking in terms of race. Identifiable traits were not confined to one race and were not uniform in frequency within a geographic area. C. Loring Brace made a persuasive case for studying human clinal variation one trait at a time. The new views were intensely debated in anthropology beginning in the 1960s, and by 1985, anthropology's core concept of race had been rejected by 41% of physical anthropologists and 55% of cultural anthropologists. A similar survey in 1999 found that the concept of race was rejected by 69% of physical anthropologists and 80% of cultural anthropologists. During the period 1975 to 1979, twice as many university textbooks of introductory physical anthropology rejected the concept as accepted it, and during the period 1990 to 1999, no texts explicitly supported the concept.
You concluded that race is a social construct. The problem with this is that race is a biological phenomenon, not a social phenomenon. Race has its basis in biology. Social constructs are concepts of the mind and are agreed upon to some extent by society. Race is not determined socially, and it is validated outside of any social context. Common observable phenotypes among populations are explained by genetics, not society. Believing that race is a social construct does not make it so, nor does it undermine its validity. Your fallacy was implying that a social construct cannot also be a reality. Race is biologically valid and does not need the validation of society. The word itself encompasses a socially agreed upon set of rules that are useful to society as a vague identifier of human categories. Skin color is both a phenotype and a superficial construct. Culture is not skin color. Race cannot be explained in terms of factors like culture because race is biological. But there are distinctions beyond skin color, such as bone density, height, body build, skull shape and size, hormones, hair thickness and straightness, hard tissue and soft tissue traits, behavior and intelligence. There are phenotypes associated with race. These are physiological characteristics explainable by genetics. The divergence of humans out of Africa as far back as 100,000 years or even 10,000 years ago is time enough for evolution to shape drastic differences distinct to racial groups.
This is a pretty obvious factor that people like you keep overlooking. What you call race is essentially useless in terms of human taxonomy because of all the interbreeding that has gone on for the past several centuries. Yes, the initial geographic separations of populations produced the evolutionary changes that created these phenotypes in the first place. But we simply weren't limited in this way long enough to produce enough changes that would have created substantial genetic divergences. And if that just burns up you and your white supremacist friends, you have only the Europeans to blame. They're the ones who decided to colonize the entire world, and wherever they went, they made it a habit of boning the natives. You're all probably wondering why I take on this nouveau racism. As I said in my previous video, I find it insulting, and not just for the obvious reasons. Twisting disparate facts to force them in line with a sick ideology and presenting primitive 19th century political correctness under the facade of harmlessness are not innocent. Impressionable people watch shit like this and have their thinking warped, erroneously believing that this seemingly non-hostile racism is backed by science. But nice racism is still just plain old racism. No matter how calm or diminutive they may appear, racists are and always have been lying, science-perverting scumbags. Your racism isn't backed by science, Ruka. It's born from your ignorance and small-minded fear. Bigots are among the last people I feel any sympathy for. You have the tools to educate yourself on the facts in defiance of your pathetic worldview. Instead, you've chosen to be a savage.
On the one hand, Jewish achievement cannot be gainsaid. According to a book by Seymour Martin Lipset and Earl Rabb, despite the fact that Jews make up no more than 2 to 3% of the American population, they make up 50% of the top 200 intellectuals, 40% of the Nobel Prize winners in science and economics, 20% of the professors at the top universities, 40% of the partners in the top New York and DC law firms, 59% of the writers, directors, and producers of the 50 top-grossing movies, 37% of the winners of the National Medal of Science, and 50% of the world chess champions. This is no secret. Now, the outsized Jewish achievement may have an explanation in another fact that has long been known, that Jews score on average higher on IQ tests than any ethnic group for which there's comparable data. The mean IQ and IQ tests is between 108 and 115. The mean for the European population is, by definition, 100, which means that the Jewish average is a half to a whole standard deviation higher than the average. So into this context came a bombshell of a study reported in the New York Times, more recently New York Magazine, and The Economist, whose headline was, "Researchers say intelligence and diseases may be linked in Ashkenazic genes." A team of scientists at the University of Utah has proposed that the unusual pattern of genetic diseases seen among Jews of Central and Northern European origin, or Ashkenazim, is the result of natural selection for enhanced intellectual ability. That because rapid selection of a single trait is known in biology to bring along deleterious byproducts, because in genetics, as in life, you can't just do one thing. If you select a trait, then the set of genes that give you that trait will also give you a number of other things in the organism. So Ashkenazim, they argue, are susceptible to diseases caused by, first of all, recessive genes that are harmful in homozygotes, that is, people who've inherited 2 copies of the gene, one from their mother, one from their father, but are intelligence boosting in heterozygotes, that is, carriers, people who've inherited only 1 copy of the gene from their mother or their father. I'm going to break it down into 7 different hypotheses and examine them separately. The first one is that the Jewish IQ advantage is largely genetic. Now, this itself is controversial for a number of reasons, beginning with the most fundamental one, which is that many intellectuals are skeptical about the existence of intelligence. Perhaps the most famous is Stephen Jay Gould, who in the book Mismeasure of Man argued that the notion of general intelligence was a myth. And he's convinced many people that that is the state of the art. Now, I find this actually rather remarkable, that so many academics would deny the existence of intelligence, because academics are obsessed with intelligence. I don't know what they would talk about if they couldn't talk about intelligence. They're obsessed about each other's intelligence, their students' intelligence, and so on. And people who, in one form, would deny that such a thing exists, in other forums would invoke it readily, say in talking about the fact that lead paint causes a 6-point decrease in IQ, about the morality of executing a convicted murderer with an IQ below 70, or about the qualifications of the current President of the United States. So in sum, I think there's reasonable prima facie evidence for each of these 7 component hypotheses. However, all of them would have to be true for the overall CHH theory to be true. Some are circumstantial, and the most important hypothesis, namely the IQ boost of disease genes, has the least evidence. Nonetheless, the theory is highly testable and therefore deserves to be taken seriously. We know that personality traits can be measured, that within a population they're highly heritable, although again that doesn't say that differences between populations are necessarily heritable. We know that there are small statistical differences between ethnic groups, again not necessarily genetic, but the question could be asked, was there selection for Ashkenazi personality traits that were conducive to success in financial, managerial, and entrepreneurial niches? And I'll leave it to your imagination what those traits might be. And of course, once you open the door to any group differences being examined in terms of their possible genetic causes, you get to far more politically fraught issues, such as the source of the difference in IQ scores between African American and European American populations. And so not surprisingly, there have also been some denunciations of the CHH study. It was been called bad science, as having no positive impact. And I'd call the study bullshit if I didn't feel its idea were so insulting. All of them you can find in the New York Magazine article. I think this is part of a larger repugnance among intellectuals to any genetic explanation of anything. I've written a book on this topic, The Blank Slate, The Modern Denial of Human Nature, how the idea that any aspect of human talent or temperament has any biological basis has often been seen as politically and morally and emotionally incendiary in most of the 20th century. And in the book, I tried to analyze how one can sensitively deal with discoveries of a biological basis of human personality and intelligence, including possible discoveries about the genetics of group differences. I think it's safe to say that the current approach, or at least the approach in recent decades, was to deny the existence of intelligence. I mentioned the mismeasure of man as the foremost example. To deny the existence of genetically distinct human groups. There's a widespread myth that there is no such thing as race whatsoever, that that it's purely a social construction, and to call the people who don't do this Nazis. But on the other hand, there is a quotation, I don't know who's responsible for it. Reality is what refuses to go away when I stop believing in it. That in a way, it doesn't matter what our emotional reaction is to various findings. They are what they are, and they're going to stay that way regardless of whether we think that it's good for the Jews or good for anything else or not.